Hello and namaste everyone. I am Mythili, zoology faculty from Infinity Learn. So hope you all enjoyed that rapid revision session in the digestion chapter previously. Let's get going with the breathing chapter today, right? In human physiology, another important and a beautiful chapter is what we are going to rapidly revise today, right? Let's begin with the quote. Life is not about finding our limitations, but it is about finding our infinity, right? Do not set any limits for yourselves. Do not, box yourselves, brand yourselves that you can do only this much and this is what is your limit. So, a particular situation or, your learning capacities or some capability or a luck factor. Don't just think about any of these. Do not limit yourselves because knowledge and learning is infinite. In fact, that brings me or reminds me of Michelangelo quote. At 85, he was saying something about I'm still learning. So learning is something that should be infinite, and we here are trying to make sure it is fun as well, right? Let's get going with the breathing chapter. As I always in my previous lecture also I did say this is for somebody who would have finished their 11th and 12th so that you can catch up and try and comprehend, because we are doing it in a rapid pace, right? So breathing and exchange of gases. Why do we need to even breathe? The oxygen that is coming inside into the body is something that is essential for the oxidation of the food molecule, right? So that is how we open. It is utilized by the organisms to indirectly break down simple molecules. In digestion, what did we discuss? It is important that these large complex food molecules have to be broken down into simple absorbable forms, and for that to take place we need our oxygen. So this exchange of gases with the atmosphere, where carbon dioxide is produced as a waste product which is in fact exhaled out, is what is referred to as breathing. Respiration technically is the oxidation of food molecule that is taking place, exchange being called breathing. But since the NCERT says, commonly known as respiration, let's go about with that as far as our NEET syllabus is concerned, right? And when we talk about respiratory organs, any physiology chapter, it's very important that you understand how evolutionary the organ has changed, how it has evolved from lower organisms to higher organisms. So the questions can arrive from this particular region also. If you are thorough with your animal kingdom, you would recall Porifera is the first non-chordate phylum that we have studied. So these organisms, Cnidaria, Coelenterata, do they have any respiratory structures? First of all, the levels of organization is also something, and the habitat is something that is going to also has an influence in terms of what kind of a respiratory structure is present. So the general body surface, see the levels of organization mentioned there. So lower invertebrates like sponges, coelenterates, flatworms, how do they exchange? It is the general body surface is what is helping with the diffusion of gases. General body surface is what is helping with the diffusion, the exchange of the gases in these organisms. What about earthworm? It has a nice and moist cuticle. There is a thin film of water that's all around its body. It continuously secretes this mucus because this is allowing the deposition of oxygen onto it, and which is highly vascular structure is helping with the exchange of gases. This is very, very important point again. The respiratory structures are some things which are usually very highly vascular so that they can exchange the gases with that of the body, right? So the earthworm, it is the moist cuticle, important point, right? Insects on the other hand have a network of tubes. What are they called? The tracheal tubes. What are they called? The tracheal tubes. There's a network that's spread through entire body. Recall your cockroach lesson where you would have learnt about the tracheal system. There are spiracles on the lateral sides which are like our nostrils, right? So they take in the gases through these spiracles and it is, spread through the entire body through these tracheal tubes. So what happens in these organisms is basically the tracheal system is separate from that of the circulatory system. So they do not have a respiratory pigment. There is no respiratory pigment when it comes to cockroach. No respiratory pigment at all because they are independent of each other. Important point. Tracheal system is something that's independent of the circulatory system. No respiratory pigment that is required, right? Then moving on from the cockroaches, specialized vascular structures called gills are present in aquatic arthropods and mollusks. In aquatic arthropods, again there are gills like that of, say for example, palemon, prawn. If you would have studied under the arthropods, crustaceans, these are some things which are respiring through the gills, right? Then there are terrestrial forms which are mostly exchanging through the lungs, whether it is the reptiles, birds, mammals. What kind of a respiration are we seeing in them? It's the pulmonary respiration. They are respiring through the lungs. Here you can make note of these particular frogs, amphibians. Why? These are some things which are exhibiting branchial respiration through gills when it is a tadpole larva. Later when it becomes an adult, you observe there is a buccopharyngeal respiration, right? There is also pulmonary respiration, and what is mentioned in the text, there is a cutaneous respiration as well. So three ways. How is it respiring? Through the lungs, through the lining of the buccopharyngeal cavity, which is also very highly vascular structure, through the skin, the moist skin again in the lungs. And how does it respire when it is under the rest mode? Hibernation, recall, it is something which is undergoing sleep during the winter, hibernation, estivation during the summer. Again, environmental, the ecology chapters, again you will come across these, okay? They are going into from escaping in the time by, suspending. So this is also important in the ecology. What is the mode of respiration during this point? Cutaneous. Cutaneous is the only mode of respiration when it comes to hibernation and estivation. Consumes very, very less energy, which is why it opts for that kind of a mode of a respiration. Pulmonary, on the other hand, is usually when there is more requirement for the oxygen, right? So this little bit of history is important for every physiology chapter. Questions can come with these. So lower organisms, you see the general body surface, okay? Later you see in terrestrial arthropods the tracheal system, and then there are aquatic arthropods where there are gills. Yes, fishes is again one mention where they use gills. There is a kind of a counter current flow. Okay, so the blood is again something that is moving parallelly, counter current manner through to that of the water, so where they are able to exchange the gases, that is taken the oxygen and release the carbon dioxide. So the gills in that of the fishes, amphibians, it would be gills as a tadpole larva, skin, lungs, as well as the buccopharyngeal cavity as an adult, and then later in reptiles, birds and all, you see that there is a pulmonary respiration. Birds, again I will give a mention because it has additionally air sacs. Air sacs are supplementing the lungs in these organisms in order for the what is causing the double ventilation. If you observe birds, there is double ventilation that is taking place. They fly at very high altitudes where the oxygen levels are low, right? That is how it is very cleverly managing its the bodily metabolism, a miraculous not only human body but the birds as well, right? So this is where there is a double ventilation that is taking place because of the lungs being supplemented with the additional air sacs. Clear with the different organisms, how they have evolved the mechanisms, right? And then we move on to human respiratory system. So in the human respiratory system, we start with the openings above our upper lip. What are they referred to as? Nostrils. Through the nostrils, we go into the nasal chamber. From the nasal passage, it moves on to pharynx. What did I tell about pharynx the other day in digestion? Common passage both for air as well as the food that we consume, right? So it's a common passage, pharynx, which again leads to the sound box. What is it called? The larynx. What is a larynx? It's a cartilaginous box. It is a cartilaginous box that is made up of 9 cartilages, 6 types where 3 are paired, right? So there are these different cartilages that are present, like the thyroid cartilage, there is epiglottis that is made up of cartilage, there is cricoid, arytenoid, cuneiform, right? A little old syllabus where you don't have to memorize all these types of cartilages now, but understand it's made up of a cartilaginous tissue, so it's called a cartilaginous box. What is it called in birds? If you recall, it is what is referred to as the syrinx. How all these birds produce these beautiful sounds. There are some of them which are very specialized, where there are beautiful sounds that are produced. We literally call them the bird songs. Okay, syrinx is what is helping them with the production of the sound when it comes to the birds, right? So this is a cartilaginous box which is helping us with the production of the sound, and this is something which is undergoing a little bit of thickening, which has vocal cords, which is undergoing a little bit of thickening during puberty in males. In males, these vocal cords are undergoing thickening under the influence of androgens. Testosterone is thickening these vocal cords, that you see that change, right? This is something all of you have experienced by now. Your voice is something in the boys which used to sound different before puberty, and later on the voice becomes more stronger, right? It's heavier, just because of the thickening of the vocal cords during puberty, which is under the influence of these androgens. An interesting fact, if I have to give you there, during the medieval period, these choir boys, those who sing, they are castrated. Their testis is removed so that the voice is something that remains high pitch, just like the girls throughout. Okay, so some practices around that required at certain points of time. Just giving you a point there, a scientific basis. Their voice is something that remains the high pitch because they didn't want the androgens to thicken the vocal cords, which brings a more low pitch voice. The voice is something that becomes low pitch in boys after puberty, and then it remains high pitch in the women, in girls, right? So that's the sound box, and then there is glottis, which is the opening of trachea. Glottis is something that's the opening of. Do not be confused with gullet, which will be the opening of the esophagus, right? So it's a thin covered by flap-like structure, epiglottis. This is something that I talked about during the digestion chapter as well, right? A non-functional epiglottis, something which would have not functioned at certain point of time. That's when you choke on food. You're having food and suddenly, it becomes quite fatal also because of the failure of epiglottis. It tends to close the glottis, doesn't allow the food to get into the airways, and make sure it goes only through the esophagus, the food pipe, right? So the trachea is a straight tube which is extending from mid-thoracic cavity, divides at the 5th thoracic vertebra. Very important point. Where does it divide? It divides at the 5th thoracic vertebra, given in almost all the entrance examinations. Now there is NEET, of course, but previously there were different state entrance examinations for the medical colleges. Almost you take any of these CETs. By the way, today the Karnataka CET is taking place and tomorrow as well. Hope you students are just rocking it. Very all the best for tomorrow as well. See in the question paper as well, biology, it seems to be okay where you can answer. There are modified questions from previous NEET papers also. This is one reason I keep telling you to, you know, revise the previous NEET question paper so that you get a hold on the pattern, right? So 5th thoracic vertebra, where the reason why we went there is very important question which is almost asked in all the entrance examinations so far. So it can be made a little easily confusing with different options like cervical vertebral unit or a lumbar one, or 5th can be made 7th. And also remember, it is 5th thoracic vertebra where exactly it is dividing into these bronchi. It is basically dividing into primary bronchi, which is divided into secondary bronchi, two tertiary bronchi, which is again and again dividing into bronchioles, which are finally giving it away to alveolar ducts and the alveoli. So this so much of division literally looks like an inverted tree, which is why it is referred to as the respiratory tree. Right. So this being very important point, keep in mind 5th thoracic vertebral unit is where the trachea is dividing into the primary bronchi, which gets into both the lungs, right. So this is the division I was giving, bronchioles. And let's talk about these rings, which are quite important. You see these rings that are present on the trachea, they are C-shaped. Why do we refer to them as C-shaped? They are incomplete cartilaginous rings. So why are they incomplete? This is something you would have wondered. You would have, you know, always thought, learnt it as C-shaped rings, C-shaped rings. Why do you think they are C-shaped and incomplete? Because you think this is the trachea, okay, and there is this esophagus as well next to it, okay, behind the trachea there is esophagus. To accommodate this esophagus, what happens? There is a C-shaped ring. It cannot close off like this completely. There is peristaltic movement also that should be allowed in the esophagus, right? So that's the reason why they are the incomplete rings, they are the cartilaginous rings. It's basically the hyaline cartilage which is making these C-shaped rings, hyaline cartilage, right. So these rings are some things which are extending to the bronchiole level. It's the terminal bronchioles which are devoid of it. So if you look at the tissue, what is the kind of the tissue? It's important in your structural organization chapter as well. It's a pseudo-stratified epithelium which is also ciliated. Why is it ciliated? So that any dust particles and all that can be cleared, right? So it is allowing the movement there. So pseudo-stratified ciliated epithelium is what you will find in there. Again, cilia is something you will not find in the terminal bronchiole. So till there again you will find the cilia that are present. So we have two lungs which are covered by a double layered pleura. It's a serous membrane which has fluid in between. Why is that there is a fluid in between? So the friction can be prevented, right? So it's a double layered membrane called the pleura that is surrounding the lungs, and it is something that's preventing the friction. Now if you see the right and the left lung, look at this particular notch, right? It is accommodating your heart. What is it called? The cardiac notch. Easy to remember. Notch is something like a little dent, right? Cardiac is referring to the heart. So it's accommodating the heart there, which is referred to as the cardiac notch. Also it is something that is divided into two lobes by a oblique fissure. This on the other hand as a oblique as well as the horizontal fissure, dividing it into the three lobes. Right lung is something that has three lobes, left is something that has two lobes. Also right is something which is slightly higher compared to this. You can guess why, because it has to accommodate the liver underneath, very large gland. From digestion, again recall, what is the largest gland in the human body? That would be our liver, right? Then, so here we are talking about, the respiratory part and the conducting part. Again, very important part. Conducting part is something that is basically helping us with the three things. It is something which is clearing of any dust particles. So first of all, anatomically, what is a conducting part? From the nostrils, right, till almost the bronchiolar level, it is called conductory part. A little bit of these terminal and respiratory bronchioles, alveolar ducts, two alveoli, this is helping with the respiratory part. So what do we mean by the conducting part, respiratory part? Conducting is not helping us with the exchange of the gases, it is only helping with the movement of the gases. Respiratory part is where the actual exchange of gases is taking place. So in the conducting part, what are the three functions that are taking place? It clears away any dust particles. Obviously, you cannot, filter out, right? Now that we are wearing masks and all with COVID, trying to prevent a lot of dust particles, yes, of course, still. So the dust particles are some things that are cleared out here. So we have inbuilt masks also. Again, that doesn't mean you need not wear it. We are going to talk a little bit about COVID also. There we do have a little bit of inbuilt system in order to get rid of the dust particle, not the virus, remember. So these dust particles are some things that can be removed in the conducting part. It humidifies the air, it moistens it, because this is something that is getting into the human body, right? The dry air, if at all you're breathing, that is something that has to be moistened and it has to be brought down to normal human body temperature. That's why it's conducted all this way till it reaches the alveoli where it actual exchange is taking place. Yes, a little bit before that also respiratory bronchioles, alveolar duct to alveoli, that's where the exchange is taking place. In between, from nostrils till there, what is happening? You clear away the dust particles, you are humidifying the air, you are moistening the air. So these are the three things that are happening in the conducting part, and what happens in the respiratory part is something that is a exchange that is taking place. Again, a very important NEET question, I will take it to you there. Lungs are some things and heart that is present in between. It's nicely protected by a cage like structure, skeletal system. There also it's quite important, right? So this thoracic chamber, how is it formed? It is formed dorsally by the vertebral column. Very important that you understand these sides of the body. What is dorsal? This is our dorsal side. This is our ventral side. Dorsally, what do we have? Vertebral column. Ventrally, we have sternum, and these two are connected by our ribs. Laterally, we have the ribs, which are starting all the frame from vertebral column till the sternum. Of course, not all the ribs do that way. They join each other at the end. There are also freely floating ribs. Recall from your skeletal system, right? So all these together and beneath there is a dome shaped diaphragm, very unique feature of the mammals. Again, we are getting into animal kingdom there. Diaphragm is a unique feature there. So how is it? Dorsally vertebral column, ventrally sternum, laterally there are ribs, right? Beneath there is a diaphragm. All these together form the thoracic chamber. Do not get confused at all. So remember this very well, how the lungs are protected, right? So this is the anatomical setup. Then the change in the volume of the thoracic cavity is reflected in the pulmonary cavity. Very important point. That's how you understand mechanism of breathing. We are shortly going to discuss, right? So from this page, what are the two important points? Conductory pathway, respiratory region where the exchange of gases is taking place, and how is the thoracic chamber formed, right? So these are the steps that we are going to discuss in detail in this particular chapter, right from breathing, how diffusion of gases takes place, transport takes place, then there is a diffusion between blood and tissues, and finally utilization in catabolism, right. So this is something for catabolic reactions that are taking place. This is the essence of the whole chapter, right, if at all it's given in the steps. So mechanism of breathing, very important, right. Just like our volumes and capacities, that is the most important part of the respiration, and then this mechanism of breathing. So quite simple, try and divide it into the two steps, like how it's given in the text. It's inspiration, that is inhalation of the air, expiration, which is exhalation of the carbon dioxide. You inhale oxygen, you exhale the carbon dioxide. So how is it basically taking place? By the pressure gradient. So there is this concentration of the pressure difference that is taking place, where gases always flow from the high pressure to low pressure. So high to that of the low pressure. So how is it taking place basically? When it comes to the inspiration, there are special set of muscles that are helping us with it, which are external intercostal muscles and the diaphragm. So these are some things that are going to undergo the contraction. So when we say contraction, what is happening? The diaphragm, which is usually this dome shaped, becomes flattened like this, right. What happens to the ribs? Ribs is something that are like this, here is something that are going to raise. So what is happening to this entire volume? You can definitely say the volume is lesser here, right, compared to here. So more is the volume. What happens to the pressure? Less is the pressure. So simple formula, understand that during the contraction of the muscles, there are phrenic muscles as well in the diaphragm, right. So the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles, the external intercostal muscles, what are they undergoing? Contraction. Because of contraction, what happens? The diaphragm is flattened and the ribs are raised. So what happens to the entire volume? It is more. If volume is more, what will happen to the pressure? Pressure is low compared to the atmospheric pressure, rho. So the gas moves in, the oxygen moves in, and what is that? Inspiration. Now try and reverse the whole thing, that becomes expiration. So what happens? So very nice clear picture from the NCERT where you can understand, right. Diaphragm is something that has become flattened during contraction, and we will describe this as a bucket handle movement also for ribs, if for your better understanding. Once these muscles relax, what will happen to diaphragm? It becomes dome shaped. This is also a question that can be asked. When is the diaphragm dome shaped? This is something when it undergoes the relaxation, right. During contraction it is flattened, during relaxation it is dome shaped. And what happens to the ribs? Ribs are also something which are going to, in this vertical, these have raised here, these have fallen here. So what happened to the entire volume here? It is decreased. When volume decreases, what happens? Pressure increases. So it's slightly higher than the atmosphere. What will happen here? Air moves out of the lungs. Here air moves in, right. So that is your mechanism of breathing simplified, right. So then there is this forceful breathing as well, where there are additional muscles that are involved, which are the abdominal muscles. Abdominal muscles are some things which are coming into the picture when there is a forceful inspiration, or this is increased with the help of the additional muscles in the abdomen, right. So that is one other important point. So human breathes about 12 to 16 times in a minute. Simple easy question that you can answer. Very important. I can't emphasize how important. Even 2020 you had a question about the total lung capacity, TLC, right. So almost every year you will see a question from I guess about 2012 to 20, whichever paper you take, usually you will have a question from volumes and capacities, because they are asking, do you find it as a very complicated topic? No, it's quite simple. So there is this respirometer, or simply referred to as spirometer, which is a little gadget which helps us with measuring the volumes and the capacities, right. If at all in that tricky question is asked, which is the volume which is not directly measured by but calculated by the measuring the others, residual volume, that will be your answer. We will understand why and how. So tidal volume is something which is talking about the amount of air that you breathe in or out during normal respiration. Very, very important. That's how you understand tidal volume. During about 500 ml, of course, the numbers are also important. During normal respiration, how much ever air that you can breathe in or breathe out is what is referred to as tidal volume. Inspiratory reserve volume, we have already talked about normal breathing. So why again, another IRV? Forceful breathing. You do something like in yoga, okay, nowadays it's the in thing, very, very healthy. It's quite important to put away COVID also as well. It brings in a lot of immune response, strength to your lungs and all. There is this yoga where you do Bhastrika, right, where you breathe in faster and faster. There is also this deep breathing exercises also that are taking place. So during forceful breathing, okay, what happens? You are taking additional amount of air. While we are talking normally like this, while I am giving this lecture, there is a certain pace, that's amount of air that I am taking in, but when I perform an exercise, or I would have played some badminton, or I would have gone for a jog or something, I need that extra amount of air, this forceful breathing that is taking place. So that extra amount of air that I can breathe in, that becomes inspiratory reserve volume. So when I say inspiratory, it's the amount of air I take in during forceful respiration, right? This is normal. This would be forceful, and because you are mentioning inspiratory, that would be intake, right? And then expiratory reserve volume. Now it's easy, you are already telling me the answer. Forceful respiration, the amount of air that you breathe out, right? And then residual volume, how much ever forcefully you breathe out. You breathe out lots and lots of air, very, very forcefully, use a lot of force and breathe out. Still, there's amount of air that's left in your respiratory tract. You cannot respire the whole amount of respire out or expire out all the air. There's still some amount of air that's inside in the body. What do we refer to as residual volume? Residue is something normal term that you use in chemistry, leftover, right? That's residue. So this is the amount of air that is present inside the body, however forcefully you expire out. So that is the residual volume, and this is something that you cannot directly measure by a spirometer. It has to be brought about by calculating the other volumes. Clear? What about capacities? You add up all these different volumes that you studied so far, it becomes capacities, as simple as that, right? Your inspiratory capacity, what and all you will add? Normal breathing and forceful breathing. Normal inspiration, what is it? Tidal volume. Forceful inspiration, what is it called? Inspiratory reserve volume. Add to what you will get? Inspiratory capacity. Expiratory capacity is same. Normal again, tidal volume. Forceful expiration, expiratory reserve volume. So what does it become? TV plus ERV, TV plus IRV. Functional residual capacity, this will be expiratory reserve volume plus the residual volume. Because you don't expire this air when you are normally breathing, only you are forcing air out, then you consider expiratory reserve volume, right? So that is also left over, residual volume is already there. So add these both, you will get functional residual capacity, right? And then vital capacity, it will be the tidal volume, that is normal and forceful of both inspiration, expiration. So TV plus ERV plus IRV, that will become your functional residual capacity. Total lung capacity, you add up everything that we have studied so far here. You add up the residual volume also, that will become your total lung capacity, right? So these are all the different capacities, that volumes. This box, quite important, you need to understand partial pressures. First of all, what is a partial pressure? Partial pressure is the pressure that is exerted by a gas on a mixture of gases. So this is pressure again which is following the same pressure gradient. How does oxygen move in? It is 159 mmHg in the atmosphere. So in alveoli, lesser 104. So it is moving inside into alveoli. From there, oxygenated blood 95 further down. So it has moved in. To tissues, it is 40 moved in. And what happens in the tissues? It has used up in the chemical reaction, and what did it release? Carbon dioxide. Now that has to go out. So it is 45, and it moves into the deoxygenated blood, which is again the same, and it moves further into alveoli 40 further down to 0.3. You may ask this question, there is so much of difference when it comes to the oxygen, 159 to 104 to 95, not much with the carbon dioxide. The solubility of carbon dioxide, it is something which is high, 20 to 25 mentioned in your NCERT text itself, right. So this again gives you a clear picture of the movement of the gases. Alveoli, quite an important structure. Remember the squamous epithelium of the alveoli, the basement membrane, endothelium of the blood vessels. Together, what do they make up? It is the respiratory membrane, right? It is the respiratory membrane. There are different types of alveoli, type 1, type 2 and macrophages. Type 1 help with exchange, type 2 are some things which are secreting surfactant, surface acting agent. It is something that is keeping the alveolar shape intact. Macrophages, any foreign particle that enters, it's protecting our body, right? Alveolar macrophages very much required. In COVID also what is happening? The virus is inflaming these alveoli, this fluid that is accumulating, it's causing pneumonia in severe cases and leading to death as well. So we need those alveolar macrophages, right? So the transport of gases, oxygen is something that is transported 97% as by the RBCs. It is transported as oxyhemoglobin. On the other hand, carbon dioxide, 70% of it is carried as bicarbonate ion. Give it some 3 to 4 or even 5 stars. Bicarbonate ion, it is given some thrice 4 times in the NEET itself, if you take into consideration 2010 to 2020, right. So very important, this saturation sigmoid curve that is happening, it slightly moves towards the right side if the PO2 is something that is becoming low, PCO2 is something that is becoming high, partial pressure of carbon dioxide, then hydrogen ion concentration is something that is, if at all pH is low, the oxygen binding to the hemoglobin is something that is becoming lower. So understand this also, where hydrogen ion concentration is more, the pH is something that is low. So understand this very well in order to understand this. And the temperature also, if at all it is high, it is slightly moving towards the right. Left is something that you will find in fetal hemoglobin, because they do not have bisphosphoglycerate, which is why the affinity is more. Fetal hemoglobin has more affinity for oxygen. You can also recall carbon monoxide, which has much higher affinity for the the oxygen, 250 times, which is why carbon monoxide poisoning happens very fast manner, right. Very important reaction, carbonic anhydrase. Without it, the reaction is quite slow. You would have learnt in your biomolecules 10 million times more just because of this. This is present just in the RBC? No, in the plasma as well. So this is something that is giving rise to temporary carbonic acid, which gives rise to bicarbonate ion. And this hydrogen ion is something that is moving out of the cell to this bicarbonate ion is something that is moving out. In order to substitute for this, there is a chloride ion that's moving in, which is a Hamburger's phenomenon, and reversal happens, reverse chloride shift when it comes to the alveoli. So this is something, a very important reaction. Regulation is by respiratory rhythm center, right, that's present in the medulla. Very important vital center. It has almost all vomit center, if you recall, from digestion, cardiovascular center from body fluids and circulation, respiratory rhythm center, the pons, pneumotaxic area as well. And there are chemoreceptors also which regulate both in the respiratory rhythm center as well as in the peripheral, that is aorta, carotid arteries. They are sensitive to what? the carbon dioxide concentration and the hydrogen ion concentration. Surprisingly here oxygen is insignificant when it comes to regulation. These are the points you need to remember. Finally, the disorders, asthma is something which is basically the inflammation of bronchi and bronchioles. Emphysema, you know, smoking is something that is, in smokers is where it is mostly caused, the alveolar surface area is decreasing. Respiratory disorders where particles deposit in your lungs, fibrosis is caused, especially those workers who work in mines, you know, the stone cutting, these business silicosis, asbestosis, biocinosis, there are pneumoconiosis, all these are different kinds of particles that are being deposited in the lung. So disorders in every physiology chapter are important, quite easy questions. Right. So that is your rapid revision of this physiology chapter. I'll come up with some of the second year chapters the next time in the next session. See you all kiddos. Happy learning.